Welcome back to our Obscure and Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg series. If you're new, a link to the previous Iceberg compilation featuring tiers 1 through 4 will be provided in the description, as well as a link to the iceberg chart itself so that you can follow along. As always, I would like to give a special shout out to our channel members. You can also become a member by clicking the join button or by making sure you're subscribed. But enough of that, we will now begin our descent of the Obscure and Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg. There is a protected county in southern Wales that had been the location of some very interesting UFO sightings in the late 1970s. To be more specific, the time of major activity started in February of 1977. And it begins with the Broadhaven Primary School, where a group of children ranging from 10 to 12 years old witnessed what they described as a silvery cigar-shaped object amongst the trees. Some of the children were understandably frightened, and so they ran inside to get the teacher's attention. But when the teachers came outside to check, the object was gone. According to various sources, initially the teachers did not believe the children. It wasn't until the children went home and told their families about it that the claims were taken more seriously. It was the headmaster of the school, Ralph Llewellyn, who separated each of the students and, in a testing-style manner, had each of them individually draw what they saw to him. To his surprise, all of the drawings that the children provided were shockingly similar. They all featured a silver disc with a round dome in the center, and some even featured beings. This event was eerily similar to the Zimbabwe aerial school encounter from September of 1994, where around 60 students at the aerial school reported an encounter with a similar silver object. Only this time, the beings who inhabited said object came out and actually communicated with the children, telling them about the environment and technology through telepathic communication, this being one of the most famous encounters with extraterrestrial beings. But our encounter at Broadhaven was not the only event to occur in Dyfed during this time. The Combs family, who lived not too far from the Broadhaven school, reported multiple encounters with strange 7-foot-tall beings, but their experiences seemed targeted and spanned over a large period of time. They worked at the Ripperston farm, a location that is now famous for the book The Uninvited, which tells the true story of the family's experiences throughout 1977. The Combs family consisted of Billy, Pauline, and their children, and it started when Pauline reportedly witnessed the ball of light floating in the sky while on the farm. What came next was a series of events that practically drove the family insane. In the time after Pauline's first sighting, the Combs family began having difficulties with their electronic equipment. Light bulbs were bursting, home appliances and farm equipment would blow fuses repeatedly, and despite many attempts to repair the electric problems happening in the home, nobody could find what was causing the problems. There was one instance in which Pauline and some of the children were driving home, when all of a sudden, one of the kids saw what they described as a glowing ball of light. Frightened by this, Pauline began driving faster in an effort to evade this object, but it turned around and followed them until the engine of Pauline's car suddenly died, only a short distance from their home. This was when her and the children ran inside to get Billy, but when Billy came outside to check on the object, it flew over their home and disappeared, leaving everybody terrified. One of the Combs daughters even claimed that a dark figure would walk around their home at night, going from room to room. But one of their most notable experiences happened on a night that Pauline and Billy were watching a movie. It was Pauline that first noticed bright lights outside of their window. At first, she tried to ignore it, but when Billy noticed, he got up and went to check on the window. This is where the couple saw what they described as a very large being wearing a silver suit of some sort and a helmet with a dark-tinted visor. According to them, this being had to be around 7 feet tall, and at the same time, the electric devices inside of the home began acting up again. Billy sent Pauline to go check on the kids while he called for help, but when help arrived, the being was not anywhere to be found. only large footprints left outside of the window that it was standing in front of.
You again, Dyfed? Oh, golly, your hands are cold, lad.
Yeah,
Well, anyway, these people are interested in your experience.
Yeah.
Mrs. Coombs has seen things disappear into St. Bride's Bay and watched flying silver and orange balls pass her farm.
And then after that came the silver-suited man, which was the most terrifying experience of it all.
Where did he appear?
In my window, but there were those people standing now. Excuse me. He was about 7 feet tall, and the width of the window, which is 3 feet wide, and he was there for about 2 hours.
And this was not the only sighting like this. In the coming weeks, the family had more encounters. Cows on the farm would suddenly disappear and reappear in strange locations. The Combs children had even claimed that they had seen a figure dressed in silver while out playing in a nearby field. Things like this happened so frequently to the Combs family that they were starting to lose sleep, and it was becoming clear that this was not going to stop until whatever was doing it was finished. After some time, the family began getting visits from strange men dressed in black suits, described as having very unnatural and unsettling features. These men would always come to the home looking for Pauline, but she had managed to avoid them through what seems like sheer luck. They would, however, scare the Combs children with their visits, causing them to live in more fear than they already were. And finally, one night Pauline reported having a very strange dream, where she was transported somewhere and found herself inside of a dome-like room, on a table, with a very large screen in front of her. When she woke up, she noticed that she had a small mark on her, similar to those found on those who claimed to have been abducted. This experience seemed to be the climax, because after this, the activity that was tormenting the family for now a total of 11 months came to an end. But the emotional and mental scars left on the family would last forever. Another encounter happened at the Havenfort Hotel. The owner, Mrs. Rose Granville, was doing her nightly duties when she looked out the window and spotted a large dome-shaped object outside, as well as 2 humanoid beings wearing strange suits with black visors, similar to what Pauline had described. Frightened by this, Mrs. Granville left to go find help, but when she returned, the object and the beings had already disappeared. There was also Mark Morstan, who reported to have had a face-to-face encounter with one of these beings. Mark was walking near his home when he saw a glowing object on a ridge close by. At the same time, he began to hear some rustling and turned to look at a hedge where the sound was coming from. This is when a 7-foot-tall being, wearing a helmet with a black visor, stepped out from the hedge and began walking towards him. Frightened by this, Mark ran away, but returned the next day with his father, where they discovered a large footprint that they stated to have been too big to be made by a normal person. Of course, there is no evidence of any of these things happening during that time, and while we do have various interviews from first and second-hand witnesses, we have to take all of this information with a bit of skepticism. Whether you believe in extraterrestrial life or not, the amount of reports that happened in the area during this time is not something to just brush off. Despite it being in different parts of Wales, most of the residents seemed to have reported the same 7-foot-tall beings, with helmets that looked like black visors. And with all of these similarities, it really makes you wonder just what was going on in the Dyfed Triangle in 1977. The chopper ghost incident comes from Germany in 1981. The story goes that a local dentist office in the city of Neutrubling, ran by Dr. Bastietz, his wife, and their assistant Claudia, began receiving calls from an unknown individual with a very raspy voice. It called itself Chopper. Chopper would frequently call and insult the dentist and his wife, but they would not insult Claudia. Chopper was actually very nice to Claudia, and apparently took a liking to her, though eventually, the calls would become more and more frequent, causing stress and making it difficult to run the dental practice without being constantly harassed by these phone calls. It even got to the point that they had to get the phone lines looked at and installed a call interception circuit. This seemed to stop the calls for a short time, but eventually, the calls resumed, and this time, Chopper's voice would even interrupt outgoing calls with patients. This caused Dr. Batsietz to have the phone lines looked again, and with the help of technicians, replaced many of them with new ones, though despite efforts, nobody was able to find the source that allowed Chopper's voice to intercept the phone calls. The calls would continue and escalate until Chopper threatened to take Claudia's life. This prompted the doctor to contact the police, who went around the neighborhood and interviewed potential suspects. They did end up focusing on one neighbor who had had a surgery that made his voice particularly raspy, but no real evidence was found that could tie him to the calls, and once again, it was left a mystery. But this is when the voice started being heard from inside the dental office as well. It was heard coming out of sinks, power outlets, and even a toilet. By now, the patients were beginning to get harassed while getting procedures done. Word began to spread, and eventually, everybody wanted to know about the ghost named Chopper. Journalists flocked to the dental office, and many of them were focused on Claudia, the girl who the ghost was seemingly in love with. She was now the center of attention, and according to reports, it appeared as though she was basking in the spotlight. But the police were still not finished investigating the situation. They had formed a specialized unit named Sokogeist, whose task was to investigate the alleged ghost activity happening around Claudia. The Sokogeist unit took special interest in Claudia, since she had clearly been enjoying the attention she was receiving. They found this a bit suspicious. They also noted that the activity seemed to happen primarily when she was in the room or nearby.
Chopper, warum legst du halt nichts? Ja. Chopper? Chopper, hast du jetzt gehört, was wir jetzt geredet haben gerade vorhin?
Alles gehört.
Alles gehört, so. Naja, warum sagst du jetzt nichts? Chopper.
Gleich hier allein.
Ja.
It's in this video that the investigators noted how Chopper's voice only appeared when Claudia had her back turned towards the investigators, prompting one of them to position himself at an angle where he could see Claudia's face more clearly in the reflection of the mirror in front of her. This is where they saw her lips move whenever the Chopper voice manifested itself. Following this discovery, the doctor, his wife, and Claudia were all arrested, where they admitted to have made up the whole situation, using the room's special acoustic characteristics to make the voice sound as if it was happening somewhere else. The three were fined, but the story does not necessarily end there. After the court ruling was finished, the doctor and his wife admitted themselves into a psychiatric hospital as a result of the stress and pressure that came after they were found guilty of faking these events. Though it is also reported that the doctor stated he had only partially admitted to faking the voice. While he did fake the Chopper voice on many occasions, he was not the only one, and Claudia would say the same. They both appeared to be implying that there was a third source of the Chopper voice. Claudia stated that initially, the voice was done from a third party, and that this is what kicked off them imitating the voice themselves. Who this third party was has never been revealed. I would assume that maybe the wife was the third, as it makes the most sense, but I was unable to find anything solid to support this theory. Claudia eventually went into hiding, and even changed her name as a result of the backlash they had all received. There are some that believe that the original Chopper voice could have actually been a poltergeist, and that the times that Claudia and the doctor did the voice themselves, it was actually some form of possession, but obviously there is no evidence to back this up, ultimately labeling the mystery as a hoax. But who knows? Claudia would be around 43 years old at the time of this recording, meaning that there is a chance she could come out of hiding one day and tell us the whole truth about the Chopper ghost. Marcia Moore was born on May 22, 1928, to mother Eleanor Moore and father Robert Moore. Eleanor was an artist and Robert was the founder of the Sheraton hotel chain. Alongside Marcia were her three brothers, Robert Jr., William, and John. Out of the four children, Marcia only seemed to be the black sheep. She was into things like spiritual energy, astrology, and reincarnation. Being from a very affluent and conservative family, Marcia only stood out from the rest. And in her life, she had also been married a total number of 4 times, something that her family was reportedly not too pleased about. Her first husband was a man named Simmons Roof. He was an author, and together they had 3 children. Eventually, Marcia and Simmons relocated to India and lived there for over a year, where they studied yoga and the esoteric religions. Though after returning to the US, the two divorced in 1962, leading to her second marriage with Louis Acker. This marriage would only last 3 years. Her third husband was a man named Mark Douglas that she had met very quickly after her divorce with Louis. But Mark was very controlling and abusive to Marcia. He would try to control her finances and at one point physically assaulted her, resulting in Marcia leaving him, but not before he practically stole over $100,000 from her as well as the properties that they owned. After this divorce, Marcia relocated to California, where she began experimenting with hallucinogenic drugs like LSD, but she was particularly fond of ketamine, which is known for being a party drug, but also known to have many therapeutic uses. Marcia seemed to enjoy both aspects of this substance, and when she met her fourth husband, a man named Howard Altonian, who was a doctor and could easily acquire ketamine, that Marcia began to frequently use and experiment with the substance. At one point, she was openly injecting the drug into her body, whether this was just at home or on vacation with her family. Her drug usage was well known. Ketamine was not only a huge part of Marcia's physical life, but it also had a major contribution to her spiritual beliefs. She even wrote multiple books about astrology, reincarnation, and of course, ketamine. Marcia believed that the drug helped her access multiple past lives. She felt that ketamine was a goddess, and it held the key to true enlightenment. And while this did worry her family, it did not stop her from attempting to dematerialize into her spiritual self. So when she suddenly disappeared in January of 1979, there were many who believed that she may have actually achieved dematerialization. At first, her husband Howard assumed that she had been somewhere nearby, likely doing ketamine, as this wasn't abnormal behavior of her, so he did not contact the police to report her missing right away. But when she did not reappear for some time, Howard was left with no other choice but to contact the authorities. During the investigation, Howard had informed detectives that Marcia had threatened to harm herself and that she may be experiencing mental disorders as a result of her frequent ketamine use. And soon, a search for her began, but unfortunately, the search would yield no results. It was reported in this article from the New York Post that Marcia's family lacked the passion to find her. A quote from Marcia's niece Elizabeth reads, "I can recall my uncle, who was the executor of her estate, talking to my father and suspecting that it was the husband who killed her. There was concern, but no rage. There wasn't enough passion to find out the truth. They were all gentlemen, and they took care of business." Painting us a picture of the possible reaction that the family had. And despite complications from the search, Marcia's disappearance was also sensationalized because of her spiritual beliefs, which did not help in locating her at all. At one point, the police even hired local psychics in an effort to find her, though they were also unsuccessful. When Marcia's friends heard about Howard's claims of her being depressed and manic, they were pretty upset. This was not the fun-loving and happy Marcia that they all knew. But despite this, Howard managed to avoid any real suspicion until he passed away in 2006. During all of this, Howard even stated that he was going to be abstinent now that he had lost Marcia, but reportedly started dating around not long after. Police even investigated him in a series of rapes, but he was never charged with them or Marcia's disappearance. And it wasn't until 2 years after she had originally vanished that human remains were found about 2 miles from her home. It was a piece of her skull, and it provided dental records that confirmed that these remains belonged to Marcia. But this is where the mystery gets a little bit deeper. There was a hole found on Marcia's skull fragment, but examiners determined that she had climbed up into a tree, injected herself with a large dose of ketamine, and ultimately fell victim to hypothermia. Investigators believed that the hole must have happened due to the bone's exposure to the elements, but this has been debated by many who believe that Howard had something to do with it. hinting that the hole could be a bullet hole. Unfortunately, in the end, nobody was able to figure out what truly happened to Marcia. But if you ask me, I think it is very possible that Marcia could have walked into the forest to do ketamine and accidentally did too much. And maybe if Howard did have something to do with this, he could have given her a larger than normal dose, leading to her death. I believe if he did want to take her life, that this would be a safer option for him than to use a gun. But this is just my own speculation. We'll likely never know what happened to her, but maybe next time you pass by one of the Sheraton hotels, you might stop and think about Marcia. There is an ancient codex that was found in early 1800s Hungary and has not been deciphered to this day. It's called the Rohonc Codex. The codex was originally part of Count Gustav Spatiani's personal library, and it wasn't until he donated his entire collection of books to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences that scholars stumbled upon it. The codex contains a total of 448 pages. However, each of them is unreadable. It is believed that the language could be either ancient Hindi or ancient Hungarian, but there are also a large amount of symbols used in the text that are not in any other written language. In fact, it's reported that the codex contains around 10 times as many symbols as any other written language. Researchers believe that the book could have been created sometime around the 16th and 17th centuries, due to it being printed on Venetian paper that dates back to that era. The paper is even watermarked with the symbol of an anchor inside of a circle and a star on top. But alongside its unreadable texts, there are also various drawings depicting religious events, from religions including Christianity, Hinduism, and Islam. There also appears to be depictions of wars. Some of the images appear to directly reference the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, and the codex was also believed to be under a catalog entry in Count Gustav's library that read, Hungarian prayers in one volume, size duodecimo, adding more to the theory that the codex is some form of religious text. Though despite many scholars looking at this book throughout the years, nobody has been able to decipher it. In 2015, the book was moved to the Hamburg University, where it has been studied and even rescanned to provide some better images of some of the pages. There are some researchers today that believe the entire book is some form of ancient hoax, though others believe that the book tells the story of Jesus Christ as well as other religions and historical events. The codex is interesting to say the least, and whether it's an ancient fake or not, somebody put real effort into making that book, and somehow it managed to last around 400 years, all while keeping the secrets inside hidden. At 5:41 on the day of August 2nd, 1947, Chilean air tower operators from Los Cerrillos Airport received a strange message from a plane informing them that the aircraft would be landing in the next 4 minutes. The message sent in Morse code read, ETA, Santiago, 1745 hours, STENDEC. Airport personnel began to get ready for the aircraft's landing, but the word STENDEC confused them. They had never heard this word before, and so they asked the pilot to clarify on the last bit of the message. But the message they got back was simply the word STENDEC, repeated back 2 times. And that was not the only weird thing, because the plane never arrived. It appeared as though it had simply vanished into thin air. A search for the plane began and lasted around 5 days. Since the message from the plane stated that they were going to land in 4 minutes, search teams rightfully assumed that the plane would be somewhere near the area, but despite all efforts, there was zero trace of the plane anywhere to be found. The plane was an Avro Lancastrian named Stardust, registered as G-AGWH. It was piloted by a man named Captain Reginald J. Cook and his crew, Norman Hilton Cook, Donald L. Checklin, Dennis B. Harmer, and Iris M. Evans. As well as the crew, there were also 6 passengers on board the plane, and they had departed from Buenos Aires, heading to Santiago. Captain Cook, Norman, and Donald were all decorated and experienced pilots in the Royal Air Force. Dennis and Iris also had experience in the Royal Forces, so it's fair to say that the crew was strong, and so the flight should have gone very smoothly. But what could have caused the plane to simply disappear when they were only minutes away from landing? And what did the word STENDEC mean? The crew clearly thought it was important enough to send it out multiple times in their final moments, not to mention that it was in Morse code, meaning they would have had to input every letter one at a time in order to get the message through, when they could have simply sent the message SOS, a universal distress call with only 3 letters to input. All of this puzzled the world of aviation so much that people began to speculate that the plane could have disappeared as a result of otherworldly influences. This became so popular, in fact, that UFO magazine ended up adopting the name due to its growing popularity. There are many theories on the meaning of the word STENDEC. Some people believe that STENDEC is an anagram. If you rearrange the letters, you get the word descent, which is a very clear and normal aviation term, especially when you put it into the context of the original message. ETA, Santiago, 1745 hours, descent. But that just doesn't make sense. Firstly, this was not some secret flight that needed its messages to the tower to be encoded. And secondly, if the plane was in trouble while sending the message, why would they waste precious time to code a word when they were supposedly only 4 minutes from landing? This brings us to the theory that STENDEC could have stood for Stardust Tank Empty, No Diesel, Expect Crash. But again, if you were expecting a crash, why not simply send the message SOS when time is so crucial? There is also the theory that STENDEC was a Morse code typo or misinterpretation. The Morse code for STENDEC is also similar to SCTI-AR, which would be the 4-letter code for Los Cerrillos Airport, and the abbreviation AR for over. This would make sense, and when you put it side by side, you can kind of see how the messages are similar. But something that I think breaks this theory is that the message would have had to been misinterpreted a total of 3 separate times. I could understand once, but 3 is a little bit much. The location of Stardust would remain hidden for around 50 years, until in 1998, mountain climbers climbing Mount Tepangado spotted what appeared to be a Rolls-Royce engine of an aircraft, alongside scattered pieces of clothing. The climbers reported this find, and an official search was conducted in 2000. There, they found scattered human remains including 3 torsos, a foot inside of a boot, and a woman's hand, all of which were well preserved due to the icy conditions. The area of the wreckage spanned for over a mile in radius, and after DNA testing, it was concluded that the remains belonged to the crew and passengers who were on board the Stardust aircraft. Looking into the crash site even further, it was determined that the plane had crashed into the mountain at such a high speed that the impact caused an avalanche that ended up covering the wreckage in snow before search teams could get to it. We can also take a look at the crash site and the airport's locations and see how close the two are from each other. But while this solved the mystery of where the craft landed, we still did not have an explanation about what STENDEC meant. There are some reports that STENDEC is military code that stands for Severe Turbulence, Now Descending, Emergency Crash Landing, but I was not able to verify if that is true, so if you know anything about military aviation codes, please let us know down in the comments. Personally, I think that people jumped to the alien abduction theories pretty quickly. I think a much more plausible explanation, and one I've seen floating around, is that the crew unexpectedly encountered what is known as a jet stream, which is a stream of very fast wind that occurs at high altitudes. This could have quickly disoriented the crew, causing them to crash. And since they were all military trained, if STENDEC did mean severe turbulence, now descending, emergency crash landing, that could have been the reason that the crew chose to send that message. But unfortunately, since the airport crew were not military, they did not know what the code meant. But regardless, it's unlikely that they would have been able to do much from the ground. In 1982, development was happening in Florida, where one of the most, if not the most important archaeological site in North America would unexpectedly be discovered. It all started in a bog at Windover Farms, located in Brevard County, Florida, where a construction worker operating a backhoe named Steve Vanderjacht noticed something strange in his bucket. At first, he thought it was a rock, but this was odd because the area they were working in was a bog. So Steve got off and went to inspect the rock himself. When he examined it, he realized that it was not a rock. It was actually a human skull. Immediately, the project came to a halt, and the crew quickly contacted the police, having initially thought that they had stumbled upon the site of a murder. At first, the police were of no help, but after a coroner examined the bones, they concluded that they did not belong to modern humans. So the police had no real interest in investigating any further. At this point, a man named Jack Eckert and his stepson Jim Swan, who were the developers on the project, could not simply let this go. They contacted an archaeologist named Glenn Doran, who upon inspecting the remains, knew that there was much more to the discovery. With funding provided by Jim Swan, Glenn was able to get the bones radiocarbon dated, which is the method for determining the age of an object containing organic material by using the properties of radiocarbon, a radioactive isotope of carbon. Doing this, they discovered that the bones were over 7,000 years old, making them thousands of years older than the Egyptian pyramids. To put that into scale, these humans were around in the Neolithic era, or towards the end of the New Stone Age. This discovery kicked off a full excavation that required archaeologists to extract the water from the site so that they could begin searching for more remains. In total, they found skeletal remains of around 168 people, but that was not even the most shocking discovery. Each of the bodies were found in a fetal position, with their head pointing to the west, face to the north, and they all had a structure of sticks arranged in a pyramid shape, holding down a piece of fabric on top of them, that scientists believe was so that the buried person would not float up to the surface. And this seemed to have worked, because the skeletons managed to remain buried for thousands of years, but the way they were preserved also caught the archaeologists by surprise. Usually, bogs have very acidic conditions, and are low in oxygen, making them perfect for preserving mummified remains. In most cases, flesh remains on bog mummies, but that was not the case at the Windover Bog. Its pH levels were more on the neutral side, making it easier for the flesh to decompose, while also keeping the skeleton intact. Not only that, but the way that the bodies were all arranged indicated that this site must have been some sort of cemetery. Aside from the mummies, evidence of medicinal herbs and plants were found on the site, hinting that these people may have had some form of medical knowledge in treating illnesses. Some of the remains were even estimated to have been in their 70s at the time of death, meaning that these people lived relatively long lives. 91 of the skulls were found to still have brain matter inside of them. Because of this, archaeologists concluded that the bodies must have been buried within the first 48 hours of death. There were also tools made of animal bones and even a gourd container. Other clues indicated that these people were much more civilized than we had initially thought humans from that time could have been. Through their observations, archaeologists theorized that these people likely lived along the coastline during the summer season and moved inland once winter came along. This being because the cemetery showed evidence that the burials only happened in the summer, though the location that they migrated to in the winter is still unknown. DNA testing was also done on the samples of brain matter, where scientists found that the lineage could not be linked to any Native Americans living in the area during this time. According to the HistoryCenter.org website, they believe that these people must have immigrated to North America from somewhere in Asia. We are still unsure about what exactly happened to these people, but the discovery of the gravesite has uprooted a lot of what we thought we knew about people from this era. They were much more sophisticated, loving, and intelligent than we had imagined, and the Windover Bog site is evidence of that. Today, the Windover Bog is a historical landmark, and is protected with the hopes of one day returning with better archaeological technology so that we can uncover the story of just who the people from the oldest archaeological dig site in America truly were. At first glance, this beautiful $3.6 million Palm Springs home may seem like the house of your dreams. Built in 1961, It's located in one of the wealthiest areas of California, but hidden behind the walls of this house is a dark secret, because it was the location of one of the most notorious triple murders that ever occurred in that area. In 1970, Edward Friendly and his wife Sophia Friendly moved into this home. Edward had made millions from San Francisco real estate and his sale of the Bay Area Tanforan racetrack, while Sophia came from an affluent family herself, and she was stated to inherit a trust of $1 million from her previous husband, Curtis Hutton. Curtis was gifted this trust from his cousin, Barbara Hutton, in 1930. At the time, he was still alive, but he was suffering from cancer. And if he were to pass away, the trust was set to transfer into Sophia's name to take care of her and their children. Needless to say, the Friendlies were very well off. Edward and Sophia had also hired a part-time maid and cook by the name of Frances Williams. She was originally from Kansas and moved to California after her first husband passed away, living in an apartment nearby the Friendlies' home. In many of the articles covering the Friendlies' murders, Frances is often looked over, and sometimes not even mentioned at all, but she is part of the story, and tragically, she would fall to the same fate that Edward and Sophia did. In the early morning of October 13th in 1978, a pool cleaner that worked for the Friendly family was on his way into the backyard when suddenly he spotted the body of Frances laying in a pool of blood inside of the kitchen from one of the windows. He immediately contacted the police, and soon they would uncover a tragic scene. Inside the home, Edward, Sophia, and Frances were all found lifeless. Each of them had been shot in the head. It was believed that the killer managed to get inside of the home without much trouble, likely being let in from the front door. And the first person that he shot was Sophia. She had turned to run away, but was shot in the back of the head. Then, the killer moved into the kitchen, where he encountered Frances, who dropped down to her knees, likely begging for mercy. But those pleas would go unanswered, as the killer also shot her in the head, this time at point blank. Edward was the last to get killed. He was watching TV with the volume very loud, as he was already hard at hearing and used the hearing aid. Unfortunately, because of this, he would not notice the shots that killed Sophia and Frances, and he too would meet the same fate, being shot once in the head and one more time in the chest. What was interesting was that each of these kills was done swiftly, with only one shot per person, Edward being the exception with the second one to the chest. Investigators also noted that papers and other things were moved around the home, as if the killer was looking for something, but nothing was taken. This including $400 inside of a wallet that was left in plain view. It was also reported that the killer left a fedora on top of Sophia's face. This could have meant something more, likely that she had been the intended target. Police would also find bullet casings belonging to a .45 caliber handgun, but other than that, nothing that could identify the killer was anywhere to be found, and nobody in the neighborhood had heard any shots or noticed any strange activity. So, police had little or practically nothing to work with. It was believed that whoever did this was an experienced assassin, that the intended targets were Edward and Sophia, and that Frances was killed solely because she was a witness. Now, the only question aside from the identity of the killer was why. Well, the Friendlies were both very wealthy, but if nothing was really stolen from the home, then money would not make much sense. At least not unless somebody in the family was said to inherit a large amount of money, which brings us back to Sophia's $1 million trust. As I mentioned earlier, Sophia was due to inherit the trust after her first husband passed away. $1 million, that in today's age would be the equivalent of over $8 million in total. That's not even considering potential interest growth. And Sophia did have 2 children with her first husband. Their names were Sophia and Edward Hutton. And yes, they have the same name as their mother and stepfather, in case you were also confused. Upon learning about the trust, investigators began questioning Sophia's children and ex-husband, where they found out that Sophia and her children had a somewhat strained relationship stemming from money. It's even reported that her son Edward Hutton was cut out of the will. Unfortunately, Curtis would pass away from his cancer 2 weeks after his ex-wife was murdered, and the trust was transferred to the children. This was very suspicious to investigators, and after interviewing Edward Hutton, they discovered that he had a friend named Andres Christensen, who was a criminal from Scandinavia. Andres had even met the friendlies a few weeks before the murders at a restaurant in Houston. This made Andres the primary suspect, seeing as how there was no forced entry, and this man had only recently met the friendlies. It would have been possible that he had managed to get into the friendlies' home by simply being let in. But other than a suspicion, police initially had no evidence to tie Andres to the crime, which gave him enough time to leave the US and go to Denmark. Andres was eventually charged with the killings while in Denmark, due to a treaty that allows Denmark's citizens to be charged in Copenhagen if they are suspected of a crime in the US, though the authorities in the US did not move forward with the process, and he managed to stay a free man until June 2nd, 1981. This was when Denmark police caught Andres while he was in the middle of robbing a bank. At first, he had given them a fake name, but after he was taken in and fingerprinted, his true identity was revealed. Interpol was notified of this arrest, and so investigators from the US finally went to Denmark so that they could interview Andres. During the interview, he denied killing anybody, but he did give the detectives a ton of extra information. He admitted that he had met the friendlies, and that he was in the area at the time that the murders took place. He even admitted to have previously owned the same exact gun that was used in the attack. The gun was a .45 caliber Star Model PD, a compact but powerful gun that characteristically added a unique spin to the bullets fired from it, the same exact spin that ballistic investigators found on the bullets that were fired in the friendly home. However, Andres claimed that he did not have the gun when the murders occurred, because he had broken it down and disposed of it while on a train in Germany. So, without a real admission of guilt or murder weapon, investigators went back to the US in an effort to search for something that could tie Andres to the gun, but their efforts proved fruitless. In the end, Andres was only charged with the bank robbery and sentenced to serve 6 years, though many of the police working on the case strongly believed that he was the killer, even without the weapon to prove it. Edward Hutton ended up relocating to a tourist city in Mexico and denied ever being involved with the murders. To this day, the identity of the killer was never truly confirmed. We've seen time and time again how money can turn family members against each other, sometimes leaving some to pay the ultimate price. It is not too often that a case as brutal as this is left unanswered, but unfortunately, justice is not always promised. In this day and age, it's hard not to hear about cryptocurrency. It seems like every day there's a new crypto coin, NFT, or some emerging form of digital money. But the one cryptocurrency that stands strong above all others has unequivocally got to be Bitcoin. At the time of this recording, a single Bitcoin is worth over 67,000 US dollars, and every day it seems to get more and more popular. I personally remember when it was worth cents, and some people I knew used it to purchase some products from the internet. Never would we have thought that one day the coins that were practically thrown away would be worth so much. Though despite its popularity, we do not know who the creator of Bitcoin really is. Development of Bitcoin started in 2007. The famous Bitcoin white paper was released in 2008. It explained what Bitcoin was, how it worked, and at the top of the page was the name of the author. Their name was Satoshi Nakamoto. Given the name, it has been assumed that Satoshi Nakamoto could be Japanese. We also know that Satoshi worked on Bitcoin from the beginning but stopped directly working on it in 2010. And at one point, they held around 1 million Bitcoins, skyrocketing them into being one of the richest people on the entire planet. In today's value, that would be worth over 63 billion USD, and whoever it is that controls this monumental source of wealth remains a ghost. It's believed that the name Satoshi Nakamoto is a pseudonym, similar to how authors go by a pen name. This was likely because whoever originally created Bitcoin wanted to retain anonymity, given that the creator and the original team could be targeted since they were technically in control of such a large reserve of money. This would make a lot of sense. That, or they simply wanted to avoid the media and public attention that was sure to come if their true identity was ever revealed. Over the years, there have been many people who claimed to be the creator of Bitcoin, and since Satoshi has never made a public statement other than the white paper release, Nobody has been around to truly deny these claims, but so far the true identity of Satoshi has not been officially revealed. Two notable people who claimed to be the creators were Craig Wright and Nick Szabo. Craig is an Australian scientist who was caught stating that he was running Bitcoin from as early on as 2009 in a leaked transcript. But a deeper look into his blog posts revealed that the posts where he claimed that he had created Bitcoin were all backdated to make it appear as though that they lined up with the creation of Bitcoin. In 2024, a London High Court determined that Craig was not Satoshi Nakamoto as a result of the overwhelming amount of evidence against him. Nick Szabo, on the other hand, was a computer engineer and the creator of BitGold that is described as being the precursor to Bitcoin and was launched way back in 1998, though unlike Craig, Nick never claimed to be Satoshi. This theory came from the public speculation, leaving the possibility of him being the creator open. There is one more person who people believe could have been Satoshi, or at the very least someone who had very close direct involvement with Bitcoin's creation, and that person was Steve Jobs. Steve was one of the biggest leaders in the tech industry when he was alive, so this would make a lot of sense. But it was a blog from 2023 where a man named Andy Baio stumbled upon a hidden PDF file containing the Bitcoin white paper on his Mac computer. And as it would turn out, the file was included on every Mac with the Mojave 10.14.0 OS and could be found by simply going to the terminal and inputting this command, after which you would find the famous Bitcoin white paper. This has since been patched with the release of the Ventura 13.4 OS, but the evidence of its existence lives online. Another reason that people believe Steve Jobs was Satoshi Nakamoto was because Satoshi stopped working on Bitcoin in December of 2010, and Steve Jobs passed away in October of 2011, only 10 months after Satoshi allegedly stopped being involved. We know that Steve was suffering from pancreatic cancer at the time of his death, and if his health was deteriorating in the year leading up to his passing, it would make sense that he would not be able to work on Bitcoin anymore, lining up both timelines pretty nicely. But as of the time of this recording, this is just speculation, and Apple has not fully explained why the white paper was hidden on all of these Mac devices, other than an engineer snuck it in there and it managed to stay hidden for quite some time. Something that I find very odd coming from Apple. It is very possible that Satoshi Nakamoto was not just one single creator, but a group of individuals who all worked on Bitcoin together. Though whether it was one individual or a group of people, it is very likely that everyone involved or close by had to sign NDAs to keep the identity secret, meaning that we'll likely never know, or at least have to wait a very long time to figure out who Satoshi Nakamoto really is, leaving the identity of the person or people who created the most revolutionary form of digital currency a mystery. Dana Bradley was a 14-year-old girl from Newfoundland who disappeared on December 14, 1981. It was her mother's birthday, and Dana had gone to a friend's house after school. Dana was supposed to head home so that she could celebrate with her family. The plan was to take the bus that was only a short walk from her friend's house and use it to get home. But as her family waited, Dana never showed up. Right away, her mother and stepfather noticed something was wrong and attempted to contact the police. But because it was relatively soon since she had disappeared, they did not start an official search until the next morning. The search for Dana went on for 4 long days, until a man named Del Smith, who was out with his family in the woods looking for Christmas trees, stumbled upon what he had initially thought was a mannequin. But once he got closer, Del noticed that this was not a mannequin at all. It was the body of 14-year-old Dana Bradley. The area Dana was found in was deeper into the wooded area off of Maddox Cove Road. Del had gone deeper into the woods because he believed that that's where he would find a better Christmas tree. But what he ended up finding was this missing girl. Where she was found, Dana was laid carefully on her back, as if she were already laying in a coffin. Her books from school were placed underneath her arms as if she were holding them, and her face was clean. But an autopsy revealed that she had been sexually assaulted, and that the cause of death was ruled to be blunt force trauma to the head, It was after seeing a newspaper article that investigators were contacted by two brothers named Harry and John Smeaton. Harry and John were working at a nearby lot selling Christmas trees, and at the time that Dana went missing, business was slow, so the two were reportedly in their truck watching people. This is where they stated that they had seen a girl they believed was Dana. They told investigators that when they saw her, they thought that she was going to the bus stop, but instead of going to the bus stop, she stuck out her thumb as though she were attempting to hitchhike. They found this a bit odd since she was so young, but almost immediately, a car pulled up next to her, and she got in. The brothers said that they believed the car was either a 1973 to 76 Dodge Dart or Plymouth variant. It was old, beaten, covered in dust, and the color was either beige or tan. They also reported that the passenger door did not appear to work correctly, and this forced the driver to lean over so that he could open the door for Dana to get in. Thankfully, Harry and John were parked pretty close to Dana when all of this occurred, and were able to give a good description to the investigators. Not only that, but two more witnesses came out to speak with police, basically telling them the same story. With this information, the detectives managed to draw up this sketch of the suspect. The police also managed to get a very small sample of DNA off of Dana's body, but at the time, DNA technology was not very advanced, so the sample was stored in the hopes that sometime in the future, it would help reveal the possible identity of the killer. With all of these new discoveries, investigators ended up interviewing hundreds of people and examined over 800 cars, but these efforts would not bring them any closer to solving this mystery. The story ended up gaining a lot of popularity, so much so that Dana's family started getting calls from an individual who would mock them about Dana's death. This person was charged with harassment in 1982, but it would appear that they had nothing to do with the death at all. They simply wanted to troll the family. Despite slowing down immensely, the case never went cold, and in 1986, detectives received a tip about a guy named David Somerton, and so they interrogated him, where he admitted that he had been the one that killed Dana, even telling the detectives where the location of the missing vehicle was. But David's information did not help them find any vehicle at all, and, in a strange turn of events, he would take back his confession, claiming that the police had kept him in custody for over 18 hours, prompting him to give them a false confession. With this, and the lack of evidence tying him to the case, the police had nothing. But he was charged with lying to the police and ended up receiving a 2-year sentence. Another breakthrough in the case would not happen again until 2014. This time, a man named Robert came to the police and told them that he had actually been there when Dana was abducted and killed. He stated that at the time he was very young and had repressed the memory due to the trauma. But Robert and his 4-year-old brother were allegedly in the car of a man named Thomas Carey. Thomas was a convicted pedophile, and Robert and his brother were in the back seat. The two were very young and small, so they could not be seen in the car when Edward and John had spotted the abduction. According to Robert, he and his brother were riding around with Thomas when they stumbled upon Dana, who was attempting to hitch a ride. Thomas stopped and picked her up, after which Dana gave Thomas the address, and they started driving. But Thomas did not drive towards the location of Dana's home, and when she noticed this, she began to get scared and even attempted to jump out of the moving vehicle, only to get grabbed and pulled back in by Thomas. Eventually, Thomas drove to a wooded area where he tried to assault her, but Dana fought back and tried to escape, angering Thomas, who took a tire iron and hit her on the head. After this, the three of them cleaned her up and positioned her in the way that she was found, allegedly hoping that she would just wake up and go to school sometime after. They then buried the car somewhere in Witless Bay. Police found many discrepancies in Robert's story, and as a result did not take him too seriously. But this was not the same case for the public. A group called Justice for Dana was formed on Facebook, and after police confirmed that they were not willing to spend the resources on excavating the location that Robert had told them the vehicles were in, the Facebook group began to raise the money so that they could search for the vehicles themselves. After 16 months of this, they finally had enough money to start the excavation, where they did manage to find 2 vehicles buried in the location that Robert had said, one of which even belonged to Robert's father. But neither of the vehicles were able to provide any clues due to the state that they were in after being buried for so long. And finally, in 2016, the DNA that was found on Dana was finally able to be tested, and it was concluded that the killer was not in the system. While this may not sound like a good thing at first, it gave detectives the opportunity to eliminate many suspects that were in the system, but this would include Thomas Carey. and ultimately disprove Robert's story. Dana's family never did stop searching for her, and even now, the case is not ruled as a cold case. It seems as though investigators are still trying to figure out the truth. Dana would be about 57 years old at the time of this recording, but her name has lived on by those who are still searching for answers, in the hopes of one day bringing justice to her and finally give some closure to her family and the local community. And that wraps up the first half of Tier 4 in our Obscure and Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg. If you made it this far, leave a like. Let me know which entry was your favorite down in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching.